Welcome into another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas, and today we're going to go through each team in the SEC, all 16, their ceiling and their floor. I'm not going to spend too much time on each team. This video has been 45 minutes long, but I am doing these in short form on all my pages as well. So if you want more details into why I'm on each team the way that I am, you can go find them there. But let's just start off. All 16 teams, ceiling and the floor. Starting off with Alabama. Now, the Crimson Tide. Kalen DeBoer is a very good coach. He hasn't gotten over that hump yet with Alabama, but the guy following Saban was always going to look a little bit weak just because of relative to what Saban had that program at. But DeBoer, really good coach. That roster, really, really strong, really just outside of running back and quarterback questions. But because of this, looking at that roster as a whole, how much talent there is. And really the only question marks to me are who is the quarterback? And can their running game progress from where it was last year? The running game can't be any worse, and they still made the playoff and they still won 10 games. And at quarterback, I think the ceiling with either Keelan or Austin Mack is probably a little bit higher than it was with Ty Simpson, even though I did love Ty Simpson as a player. But because of all that, my ceiling for Bama, if everything goes right, is 12-0. Well, looking at that defense, their secondary is ridiculous. And they have multiple NFL players in that front seven. So defensively, in a ceiling situation, I trust them completely. And offensively, that receiver room is absurd. The quarterback potential is very, very high. So obviously, I don't expect Bama to go 12-0. I think you're going to just have some kinks to work out, especially in the beginning of the year. But in a ceiling situation, with how good that roster is, it's absolutely 12-0. And then their floor, Bama's floor is higher for me than most of these other schools who are like good teams who will be, just because their defense really is that strong suit. I don't see a way that their defense falls flat on its face, but their floor, if the quarterback, whichever one it is, doesn't get into rhythm quickly enough once we get to conference play, and the running game really doesn't take a step forward, and it's just as much of a liability as it was last year, I think Bama's floor is 7-5. Because you got games like Georgia, Tennessee, A&M, LSU. They have to go to Vandy, to Mississippi State, to Kentucky. There's enough losable games on that schedule where if the quarterback situation isn't ideal and you can't run the ball, they're just going to have a really hard time scoring points, especially in some of those road games. So Bama's ceiling, without a doubt to me, is undefeated. But their floor, I think, is down 7-5 just because of the potential hurdles that offense will have to overcome. The Arkansas Razorbacks. Ryan Silverfield's first season there in Fayetteville. Arkansas's problem has never been, do we have individual talented guys? But it's, do we have a talented 22 guys? And I don't think they're quite there yet this year, but their ceiling is 7-5. They have plenty of weapons on offense. Both of those quarterbacks I'm really excited about in KJ Jackson and AJ Hill, whichever one of those guys get the start. You have Braylon Russell back there at running back. And defensively, there were some pretty decent portal ads, but also just alien-like specimens who, if they can lock in and really become true focused football players and not just great athletes who are playing that position, they can be good ball players. So I think 7-5 is realistic. Let's say these are the 7 wins. North Alabama, at Utah, Tulsa, Tennessee, Vandy, Auburn, South Carolina. None of those games are unwinnable by any means, right? So I do believe that 7-5 is on the plate for Arkansas if Silverfield is able to, if everything does work out immediately. But the floor for Arkansas is down at 2-10, right where they were last year, because you're breaking in a new quarterback. Is that guy, whether it's KJ or AJ, is he able to be comfortable in an offense that we don't know is going to be fully dynamic yet? Right? We know we have Braylon Russell, but the receivers, there isn't that much out there to be like super pumped about. And defensively, like I said, it's a bunch of really good athletes. Do you have good football players or great leaders out there? Their floor is very low, right? Just because of how much new there is, how much Memphis new there is, with all due respect to Memphis, but I'll say the same thing about Auburn in a second here, but just so much G6 talent is moving up. The floor, I think, is very low for the Hogs. I hope they'll go there because Arkansas is very fun when they're good and winning games. But I do believe that Arkansas' ceiling up at 7-5, floor, though, down at 2-10. But yeah, now moving on to Auburn and Alex Golesh and all those USF guys he brought over. Their ceiling's up at 8-4. And that's a little bit of a lower ceiling given, what Byron Brown can do and what those USF guys can do. But these 4 games, man, at Tennessee, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, and at Alabama, it's really hard to picture them winning more than one of those games. And even if they grab one of those games, right, they still have to play LSU. They still get Baylor in the opener. They get Florida early on. So just because of how hard the schedule is, I have a hard time seeing more than 8 wins. But, if Byron Brown really elevates, is going to be a more rounded player and he stays healthy and defensively, a bunch of those new ads can really be strong. Auburn is a good enough program. Their home field advantage is plenty good enough to win some big-time games. So I think 8-4 is their feeling, but the floor for Auburn is down at 3-9. I don't expect that to happen. So don't freak out if you're an Auburn fan watching that. But, if Byron Brown either just can't throw the ball very well consistently or injury concerns pop up again, and just you're relying on so much USF talent with this Auburn team this year. Now, that's not a bad thing. USF was a very good team. They beat Florida last year. But doing it week in and week out in that league is much different than coming into a game, punching up and pulling an upset against what was a horrible Florida team. So I do have questions about, can those USF guys for Auburn, consistently do this week in and week out. I think that they can do it better than 3-9, but that is their floor in my opinion with what that roster looks like. They'll still beat, Southern Miss. I think they can catch, Vandy or Florida at home, and they have that game against Samford. So I don't see them being down where Arkansas is, but I do think that 3 wins is in the realm of possibility, mainly revolving around Byron Brown. How much does he develop, and can he stay healthy? Moving on now to Florida. John Summerall in his first year. Now the Gators' ceiling, I think, is all the way up at 10 wins. Because talent has never been a problem with Florida, even when Napier was there, right? I mean, you saw this preseason rankings. Florida was really always up there in the power rankings, and that's because of how good these football players are. And, now you have one of the sleepiest, best receiver rooms maybe in the entire country. You have Jaden Ball back and depth behind him on the defensive front. You brought back Jaden Woods. You brought back Miles Graham at linebacker. There's so much talent on this Gators team and their schedule, right? They go to Texas. I don't see them winning that game, probably regardless. And then at Auburn, at Missouri are tough games. But in terms of road games in conference, drawing Auburn, Missouri, and Kentucky, that's a pretty good draw. Texas is a wash. That's a loss. And then they go to FSU at the end of the year, but their road games in conference are not their hardest ones. Really, their hardest conference games are Ole Miss at home, Oklahoma at home. Georgia is neutral. They go to Missouri as well. I think I said that. But I think the 10-2 could be their ceiling because of how manageable their home and away schedule is. But the floor for Florida, down at 5-7. Right, just same concerns I have with with these other first year coaches is just, especially with Florida, quarterback situation. They have a battle. Do they pick the wrong guy, or does neither guy really take the reins? At receiver, does Dallas Wilson struggle to stay healthy again? Jaden Ball, are you able to lean on him? Does he have a bit of a down year after breaking a K last year? There's a lot of variables and a lot of possibility where we've seen Florida teams full of talent, just like last year, lose a lot of games. I do believe that John Summerall is going to have this team on an upward trajectory, but this year things could fall apart where, you lose that opening game at Auburn, you come back home, Ole Miss beats you, you lose at Missouri, you lose Texas, you lose to Georgia. There's so many hard games on Florida's schedule where, even though, like I said, having them at home could be a benefit, if the team is struggling, you could really start piling up losses. So I think Florida is 10-2 and 5-7. Moving on now to the Georgia Bulldogs and Kirby Smart. It should surprise nobody that my ceiling for Georgia is undefeated 12-0. It's Kirby Smart and Georgia, man. They're going to always want it more than you. They're going to be more physical. They're going to beat you up. So even though Gunnar Stockton isn't a dynamic player, right, and receiver isn't a very dynamic position group, we saw last year they can just run an efficient offense and bleed you to death. And those running backs for Georgia this year are so good. It's such a deep, talented running back room. So Georgia, I believe, can just kind of run the ball on everybody. And if they stay healthy, they stay strong, Georgia can go 12-0. But in the Bulldogs' floor, I have it 8-4. And as they're going through their schedule, some losable games. I believe that Oklahoma at home is losable, but they also go to Alabama. They have to go to Ole Miss. And the Florida game, you never know, right? Because the Gators almost, you could argue that they should have beaten Georgia last year, but they were just a few plays short. So that game is always losable. And how you would be 8-4 for Georgia is kind of what I just said, right? You're kind of one-dimensional, but that running game isn't strong enough to just lean on everybody all the time. You force Gunnar Stockton, who is a great thrower, by the way, but to just really win games with his arm. And I worry less about that because of Gunnar, but more because of those receivers. London Humphreys is back. He has some good talented guys, but it's not really a dynamic, explosive room. It wasn't really last year either, but, you lose a guy like Branch. You lose a bunch of playmakers there. So I think that the receiver room actually is taking a step back. But Georgia's defense will be very good. The running game should be very strong. So I have 12-0 and 8-4 there for Georgia. The Kentucky Wildcats and Will Stein. I'm excited about Kentucky. I really am. And because of that, their ceiling for me is 9-3. I think you could see, I don't want to say Indiana-type turnaround, but we know that blueprint is there for bad programs, right, to have immediate success. So because of that, I have no issue thinking that Kentucky, if everything goes right, can win 9 games. You have at A&M, at Oklahoma, at Tennessee, at Missouri. I don't think they can go as good as 2-2 in those games. I just don't. You also have the game against Alabama early on. You play LSU. So there's a bunch of hard games, but Kenny Minchie, I think, is a really, really good player. And there are tons of great portal receivers there and a true freshman there that I've talked about a little bit before that I think is going to be really exciting. And defensively, there are just some really, really good individual pieces. I think that there's a world where we can look at Kentucky as a lightning in the bottle team here this year. I do believe that Stein's going to have good success there, but especially just this year with all this juice that Stein is bringing and his offensive pedigree, I think it could be all the way up at 9-3. But then their floor's 4-8. Right? Does Minchie not work out? Does he not have good chemistry with those receivers? Does C.J. Baxter in that running game not really work out? And defensively, does sort of the absence of a superstar hurt you? Right? Because Kentucky's defense, it's a bunch of good players. Right now, at least on paper, there's not really like, oh, wow, like that guy's the leader. That guy's the best player on that defense. You don't really have that. So, it could be another one of these portal teams where it's great on paper, but they don't work out on the field. So I think that Kentucky is 9-3 and 4-8. Moving on to the LSU Tigers, this should be a surprise to nobody. Lane and LSU ceiling this year is 12-0. I mean, they had so much money to use on this portal class and on high school recruiting. It is an incredibly talented roster. If everything clicks, if Sam Levitt is healthy and he meshes with all those receivers, and if LSU's defense is able to take pressure off of their secondary, which is very thin, and they can all stay healthy and just rely on that pass rush, that front seven, with Blake Baker, I mean, this team can go 12-0. No doubt in my mind this team can go 12-0. But their floor, I think LSU, there's a world where they go 6-6 this year. And here's why I say that. First off, I'm concerned about Sam Levitt. He has not played well in the 3 games he's played against SEC teams. And 2 of those were against Mississippi State, and they were really bad games. But also the injury concerns. I know that he's getting healthy now that we're in the summer, but he missed all of spring. And that worries me, period. But it worries me even more when you're transferring up to a new conference with a new coaching staff. 12 new receivers in the portal for LSU. Missing spring for Levitt worries me. Now, obviously, he'll have summer, he'll have fall, we hope, to kind of get used to it, but missing spring is a big part of that. So I do think that there's a world where against Clemson, Ole Miss, and A&M, there's a world where they start slow. And also, at the end of the year, all these players on LSU, this sounds bad, but they were bought. They were bought for this season to go try and win a championship. So if they have 4 or 5 losses late in the year, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of effort. I think you'll see a lot of opt-outs. Like, respectfully, Sam Levitt quit on ASU last year. So I don't see why it's impossible for him to quit on LSU this year if things are going poorly. So I think that with the Tigers, if they're stumbling, if they're out of the playoff by the time we get to like week 10 and 11, which by the way, they play Bama, Texas, and at Tennessee in a 3-game stretch, I think you could see opt-outs, a lack of effort. But hopefully for everyone's sakes, they are much stronger than that, and they're in playoff contention late in the year because this team could be so much fun. So for LSU, I'm 12-0 and 6-6. Moving on to Mississippi State. Jeff Lebby, Kamario Taylor, his first year as quarterback, their ceiling is 7-5. And I have that because State this year reminds me a lot of Arkansas last year, where this offense, if they're clicking, they will score every single drive. But defensively, I don't really know what's there. But why I have State ceiling up at 7 wins is that, let's say this offense works incredibly well. The receivers are really good with Marquise Johnson, Anthony Evans, Kamario Taylor, and Fluff Bothwell are a lethal pairing in the backfield. And then defensively, you have some studs, especially in the secondary. Kelly Jones, Isaac Smith, Womack, the 5-star kid. There's enough individual talent in the Bulldogs defense where if in a ceiling situation, it can be a solid, not good unit, but solid enough to where that offense, being as elite as it could be, could win a bunch of games. But like games, against Bama, LSU, Texas, Ole Miss. I mean, the Egg Bowl is the Egg Bowl, obviously, but a bunch of those games, I don't really know if they can win regardless. But Mississippi State's floor is down at 2-10. It's down where State kind of has been hovering in the past. They obviously made a bowl game last year, so I don't mean under Lebby entirely, but, Kamario Taylor, he had that injury in the bowl game last year. Is he 100% healthy? Is he totally right? And can he avoid getting banged up this year? Do those receivers pan out? And does the defense, is it Kelly Jones and friends, or is it Kelly Jones and 10 other guys who can't do a whole lot? I worry that there's a possibility that it's Kelly Jones and 10 other people. And if that's the case, and they can't stop anybody, you put way too much pressure on this offense where then Kamario Taylor is probably forcing throws, getting picked off, trying to get an extra yard. Maybe he gets his bell rung a little bit. There's a lot that can go wrong with State because of what I believe is a lack of depth on their defense. So because of that, I think their floor is 2-10, but they could go as good as 7-5 this year with Kamario Taylor running the offense. Then the Missouri Tigers. I'm very excited about Missouri's offense this year with Austin Simmons, that pair of running backs. Hopefully, we get Ahmad Hardy back in time. Their ceiling for the Tigers to me is 10 wins because of how good the offense is. They play Texas, they go to Georgia, they go to Ole Miss. I don't really see better than 1-2 in that stretch. Maybe 2-1 if things go really perfectly. But then you still have a game against A&M. You go to Kansas, you play Oklahoma. A bunch of hard games where I believe that 2 losses is probably a good baseline. But that offense is incredible. My biggest worry with Missouri, outside of Ahmad Hardy's health, is how do you replace all that production coming off the edge that you're losing in Zion Young and Damian Wilson? And my floor for Missouri is 6-6, and a lot of that comes from the idea that maybe they just can't replicate that. Right? Maybe they can't even come close because those two guys were so good, and the fact that they were together made them both even better. Can they replace that? We'll see. They have talented guys, but then also for Missouri, their offense, there's definitely a cap on it, right? Because Austin Simmons, he's been dealing with some injuries in the past. Can he be totally healthy? Do all the receivers get used to each other? Is Ahmad Hardy ready to go? Because Jamal Roberts is a great player, and they brought in a transfer who I'm forgetting the name of, but he had a crap ton of yards last season where he was at. So there's still talent in that Tigers running back room, but Ahmad Hardy makes the whole thing go. Is he ready to go? Is he 100% when he is ready to go? It's a lot of questions. But I do believe that Missouri's floor is still a bowl game, but their ceiling is definitely, to me, 10-2 and a playoff berth. Moving to the Oklahoma Sooners now. Brent Venables, John Mateer is back. Hopefully Mateer is healthy all of this year. And if he is, I believe the Sooners ceiling is up at 10-2. Because that defense, I think it's only rivaled by Texas as the best in the SEC. And if Mateer is all the way healthy, they got some new weapons in at receiver. The running game, similar to Alabama's, it just can't be worse. And they made the playoff last year. They won 10 games last year. If there's any semblance of a running game, I like them a lot. But they still play Texas. They play A&M. They play Ole Miss. They got road trips to Georgia, Florida, Missouri. A bunch of really hard games where I don't think that they ever walk out with less than 2 losses. So my ceiling for them is 10-2. But my floor for Oklahoma, my floor is all the way down at 5-7. And that's just if Mateer, maybe that arm slot still gets into some trouble. He can't stay totally healthy. Ben Arbuckle's offense doesn't quite develop, especially because of that running game. Defensively, I believe that they're pretty set. I have a hard time believing that their defense ever falls apart, but this Venables pattern has been 6 wins, 10 wins, 6 wins, 10 wins. So now we're in that realm of, if you believe in patterns like that, where maybe there's a bit of a letdown here. I hope that doesn't happen because I love John Mateer. I'm a big Brent Venables fan. So I do believe that their ceiling is much more where they'll be at, but I think that they could go as good as 10-2 and as bad as maybe like 5-7, based on how the whole offense pans out. For the Ole Miss Rebels, under Pete Golding, I've got my questions about Golding as for coaching for a whole season, but the players love him. I know he's a great defensive mind, and with how much talent is on that Ole Miss offense, their ceiling is 12 wins and 0 losses. They have some hard games. They obviously have an opener against LSU, and maybe the hardest game for Ole Miss, that's not true, but a really tricky one. They go to Florida after that LSU game, immediately after. Hangover spot of the century. So we'll see if they can survive that too. But obviously, Trinidad Chambliss and Kejuan Lacey, kind of a done deal. But they have so many weapons on that offense. They brought in 2 receivers from Syracuse. Caleb Odom ready to break out. They got some depth behind Kejuan Lacey at running back. And there's plenty of talent on that defense. And now, Lane's an incredible head coach. Kiffin is. There was never that emphasis on defense. Now with Golding as the head man, you'll see that kind of shift a little bit to a much more intense focus on defense, where the Rebels D could easily be one of the stronger units in the conference, which is not where they've been in the past. So because of all that, in a perfect storm, 12-0 I think is reachable. Their floor, I think, could be 6-6. And I really just say that because I don't know what to expect out of Pete Golding. I just don't. I think I'm comfortable saying right now it is a net coaching downgrade just for this season. That is not to say that I think Pete Golding is a bad coach or that he can't obviously, as he progresses, turn into a great coach. I just think that from last year to this year, in a 2-year vacuum, this is a coaching downgrade. And, with Chambliss, you're losing Lane and Charlie Weis. Does the offensive changes kind of mess you up? Could he sophomore slump? Even though it's not a sophomore, but it's his second year. There's a lot that could go wrong with Ole Miss. I hope it doesn't, obviously, because Chambliss is so fun. Kejuan Lacey is so fun. And I'm definitely kind of, in the back of my mind, hoping that Ole Miss has a good year. Not because I'm anti-Lane Kiffin, but just because it would just feel so good to see Ole Miss have success past Kiffin after that whole saga. So I'm 12-0 and 6-6 for the Ole Miss Rebels. The South Carolina Gamecocks. Nobody really seems to remember that 2 years ago they won 9 games. They were 9-3 2 years ago, and they had a very strong case to make the playoff. But then last year, they only won 4 games. And I talked about the sophomore slump with Chambliss as a potential. I think what you saw last year with Sellers was that, where he was kind of figured out a little bit. He's a great athlete. He's still impossible to sack. But him, Nick Harbor, Dylan Stewart, they all kind of regressed from their freshman years, although Harbor wasn't a freshman, but from their first years really on the scene to their second year. Now this year, you get Sellers in his third year, in his money year for the NFL draft. You get Nick Harbor with some help around him. Nitro Tuggle coming in at receiver. Jaden Gibson coming in at receiver. And for Dylan Stewart, he had a ton of help his freshman year on the D-line, elite season. Less help last year. He was doubled up a little more contained. They put Caleb Herring on that offensive line with him. They brought a bunch of portal lads at D tackle. I think all three of those guys are poised for bigger years, and that Beamer and that staff did a good job of setting up the roster around those three superstars where they can kind of lean on some other people now. So I have Carolina's ceiling up at 10 wins. I think that's possible. I think it's very possible. You have games, at Bama, at Florida, at Oklahoma, A&M, Georgia. They obviously go 2 Clemson to end the year. So it's a bunch of hard games. I don't see a way they get out of there with less than 2 losses. But if everything clicks, 10-2 is possible. And I won't listen to people saying, but these guys are bad players because they won 9 games 2 years ago. I know it's in them. And if they hit their ceiling, they can easily get there and pass it again. But their floor, I think this is the biggest ceiling to floor differential I have on here. Their floor is 3-9. Because I just made the case that we saw their ceiling 2 years ago. We also saw their floor last year, which is not good football, which is not consistent football. And why I have it being a game worse this year is because, if they get to their bye week and they're like 3-3, and then they drop a few after that, nothing's really stopping Lenore Sellers. So he's a great kid who loves Carolina, but nothing is stopping him from saying, I'm going to sit out. I don't feel like playing against Georgia and risking getting hurt. I'm going to go to the NFL draft and get ready. And then Dylan Stewart and Nick Harbor maybe do the same thing. I think if the year spirals on Carolina, first off, I think Shane Beamer might get canned, which will then elevate the odds that, Lenore's opts out. And then it could really spiral. They don't win a game because they open with Kent State and Towson 2-0. Their conference opener is Mississippi State, so 3-0. But then at Bama, Kentucky, at Florida, that is a potential 0-3 stretch if the team isn't very good. Then Tennessee, Oklahoma, A&M, maybe 3 more losses. At this point, if you're 3-6, Shane Beamer is fired and you might get opt-out. So there is really spiraling out of control potential for Carolina this year, but there's also, look at how good these players are. These guys are freak of athlete potential. So I got 10-2 and 3-9 for the Gamecocks. Hopefully we're up at 10-2. Those guys are so fun to watch when they're clicking. Tennessee Vols. I've said it a good bit on my channel already talking about Tennessee this year and their outlook. I think that this is the year before the year for Tennessee. It's not a rebuilding season. It's just a building season, if that makes sense. Right, because you're breaking a new quarterback, and I think that Faison Brandon is the future, obviously. You have TK, he's a 5-star receiver, one of the best receiver rooms in the league, just as is. And defensively, they're bringing over Jim Knowles from Penn State, who the book on him is kind of like his scheme is very, very good, but it can take a few years to learn. And so because of that, I have their ceiling, I think they're going to go to 7-5 this year, but their ceiling, if everything's ahead of schedule, right? If Jim Knowles' playbook is put in immediately, Chaz Coleman plays, hopefully off the edge for Tennessee, and that offense clicks immediately with either Brandon or George McIntyre and those receivers with Deshaun Bishop toting the rock, 10-2 is on the table. 10-2 is absolutely on the table because of what Josh Heupel can do with this much talent on his offense and what Jim Knowles' defense can look like if it is ready to go. But their floor, I have being all the way down at 4-8. Because let's say Chaz Coleman doesn't play. That's a ton of missing edge production that Tennessee just wasn't ready to have to fill at this point in the year because they thought it was Coleman. And then the book on Jim Knowles being we need 2 or 3 years comes true. So maybe, their defense will be better than it was last year. Tennessee's defense was horrible last year. But it could, it still might not be good. And if you have a defense that's not quite good and an offense that's struggling with their quarterbacks, you could easily lose 4 games. Texas, Bama, Carolina, A&M, LSU, Vandy on the road, Georgia Tech on the road in week 2. Tons of losable games to where if the Vols really are, maybe even to a greater extent than I think they are a year before the year, I think only 4 wins is possible. I would be absolutely stunned, though, if this Vols team does miss a bowl game. They should be, 6-6, 7-5 right around that. But I think for Tennessee fans, you'll see glimpses of it this year, and in 2027, you'll have a lot to look forward to in terms of maybe a playoff run, maybe even an SEC title run. Texas Longhorns. This was the easiest ceiling, maybe other than like Georgia, 12-0. I also just have Texas going 12-0. But this Longhorns roster is the best in the country. Arch Manning, I believe, is going to take that step. You saw it all through last season. He was getting better and better as he was getting healthier and healthier and more experienced. Now he has Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo, Emmett Mosley, a receiver. Defensively, this defense is so dumb. Colin Simmons, Hero Kano on the DL. You brought over Rasheem Biles from Pitt at linebacker to work with Ty Anthony Smith, some of the best secondary players in the country. And also on offense, I forgot to mention, Hollywood Smothers, Raleek Brown at running back. Texas is the best roster in the country. I believe in Steve Sarkisian. 12-0 is their ceiling. And their floor could be 7-5. Because let's say that Arch really is what he is, which I don't believe is true, but let's say, once again, he's kind of like shaking off a little bit of minor injuries where he's not 100%. And, maybe the running backs, they don't work together very well. So the split backfield just doesn't have chemistry, doesn't click. And defensively, their secondary is not a weakness. Relative to their front seven, it is the weaker aspect. So our team's able to, can you limit that front seven and throw on them? But also, why I had them down 7-5 is less because of what I believe could be potential holes on their roster, and more just this might be the hardest schedule in the country. Obviously, Ohio State. They play Oklahoma and Dallas. They get Ole Miss, and then road games. Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, A&M. This schedule is brutal. It is so hard. So if Texas is, beat up a little bit, the attrition weighs in, you could spiral, you could lose a ton of games. I don't think that's really what's going to happen. I think there are 5 games you could circle as losable, which is why I have them, which is why I had this as their floor, only 7 wins. They're going to be much higher than that. Texas, to me, is the best team in the country. I had them going undefeated right where that ceiling is. For Texas A&M now, I have their ceiling being the same thing. I think it's also 12-0 because in a ceiling scenario, Marcel Reed has developed into an elite passer and runner. Isaiah Horton, Mario Craver, Ashton Bethel-Roman could form a lethal trio at receiver. You have Ruben Owens in that backfield. And defensively, Anto Saka becomes Cassius Howell 2.0 coming off the edge. Damian Sanford hopefully comes back early enough to where he's healthy and can really contribute. And we know that Mike Elko's a really good coach. We know that. That is a given fact. So A&M with, they have tough road games. They go to LSU, they go to Bama, they go to Missouri and to Oklahoma. It's a bunch of hard road games, but in a ceiling scenario, I think that they can finish off the undefeated year they didn't get last year and go 12-0. But their floor, in a world where Marcel Reed doesn't develop as a passer, so that receiver talent doesn't get totally utilized, and where Anto Saka isn't good enough to replace Cassius Howell, where Damian Sanford isn't right enough to get healthy and be fully active on that field, 6-6, because of how hard those road games are. Like I said, LSU, Missouri, Bama, Oklahoma, they're really tough. And once again, A&M it's not a team of mercenaries, of portal guys, but we're in an era where when the playoffs are out of reach for teams who were playoff hopefuls, it wouldn't shock me to see guys stop playing. So hopefully we don't get there because this A&M team is incredible. I really like Mike Elko, and I really want to be able to love Marcel Reed. So hopefully they're closer to that ceiling, but I think it's 12-0 and 6-6 for the Aggies. And then finally, the Vanderbilt Commodores and Clark Lee in their first year post Diego Pavia. They bring in Jared Curtis, who I do believe is going to be their starter as a 5-star true freshman. Vandy's ceiling is 10 wins. And after last year, there's no reason why this can't be it. Because nobody believed in Diego Pavia last year, and he did that. So you don't want to believe in Jared Curtis again? I don't care. I just saw someone who got doubted at Vandy last year do the same thing. And, they go to Georgia, they go to Florida, they go to Auburn. Those are really like their 3 hardest road games ranked. They also go to Kentucky and Mississippi State, but they're road games similar to, I forget who it was. I forget what team it was where the road games were pretty easy. But, it's that similar thing where, you can lose your road games, but then, the home ones is where you get your harder games. And if you're able to get your harder teams at home, the odds of winning go way up. So I believe that 10-2 could be the ceiling for the Commodores. But in their floor, the floor is down at 4-8 for Vandy, right? Just because you're losing Pavia, you're losing Stowers, you're losing key pieces on that defense. Trey Richardson hit the portal at receiver. There's so much new. You're breaking in a new quarterback regardless of if it's Curtis as a freshman or Berlowitz as a first-time starter. And I do believe this is a regression year for Vanderbilt. I have them going 6-6 straight up. I think that 4-8 is within reach, though, because you have so much new. You're not going to be on a hangover because Clark Lee knows how to get these guys fired up, and he's still hungry. Right? I mean, last year was not enough for Clark Lee. I don't believe you get a hangover, but I do think that just with so much new, you're adjusting to life after Diego Pavia. there is a realistic chance that this team could just not do very well in the SEC. But what that does not mean, if they do only win 4 or 5 games, it does not mean that Vandy was a one-off. This program is here. They're absolutely here and they're ready to go. But I do think that this year you could see some regression. So I'm 10-2 on the ceiling, but I'm 4-8 on their floor for Vanderbilt. So I said I was going to try and go fast, so this video wasn't half an hour long. It is currently at 30 minutes. But if you did watch all this, I appreciate you so much for sticking through. Or hopefully maybe you just listened to your team and got a sense for where I'm at on your squad. But if you have been enjoying this college football preview content and all this SEC outlook, subscribe to me here and follow me on Twitter. I'm doing this every single day until we kick off in August. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I've been Will Thomas, and I will see you next time.